Welcome back to the Mad Podcast. Today, my guest is Nathan Benaich, founder of Street Capital, a VC firm focused on AI investing. Every year since 2018, Nathan has been publishing a fantastic report called The State of AI. And in this episode, we talked about the 2024 edition, which just came out. And we covered anything from foundation models to applications.
You will likely have similar quality of intelligence for much lower price and much smaller models. We predicted that there would be a blockbuster app that was like fully written in a generative fashion.
To the geopolitics of AI and AI regulation.
China was kind of not in this fight 12 months ago and now is very much in it. And they've been actually a very lively contributor to open source.
Please enjoy this great conversation with Nathan. Nathan, welcome.
Good to be here.
We are going to talk about your annual labor of love, the State of AI report, which came out on October 10 this year, which is a gigantic effort, super impressive, which I look forward to every year and very much enjoyed this year.
Thank you.
Maybe as a word of intro, so people may have seen the report, but like who's the man behind the report? What's your story?
Yeah. So my day job is I run a fund called Street Capital. I invest, I guess like you, in early stage companies with a focus on AI. I set it up by myself about 4 years ago, still run it as a solo GP. I invest in North America and Europe and have kind of diverse interests that are oftentimes reflected in the report in an editorial capacity. But I think the main reason why I enjoy making the report and the kind of original reason why we did it is because I think making contributions to the ecosystem that you work in and work with is just like a nice way to be a value-added contributor. And I think in our space in AI, everything is so deeply technical, and a lot of the breakthroughs do arise from universities or industry labs that I think to be as smart as you can be around where progress is going, you have to understand where it comes from and how it works. And then the second thing is that there's so many different participants to the industry, whether it's now politics, but big companies of all different sizes and sort of sophistications of AI and universities and et cetera, that all these different players are experts in their field, but they don't sort of have the time to really pop their head over their parapet and perceive what's happening in their space. And the third one was just I was a fan of Mary Meeker's Internet Trends report a couple of years ago, and I was kind of sad when she stopped making it. And I just felt like there should probably be something like this for AI. I don't think anybody enjoys the sort of kind of consulting, buy my product thing. And so we wanted to make something kind of rough around the edges where it literally looks like someone's behind the desk, typing things out and messing up the formatting and stuff. And that was reflective of progress and took an opinionated view that was hopefully sufficiently good that if it landed on the desk of the CEO of an AI company, they would think that their work was represented properly. But then if it hit the desk of somebody in policy, that they could actually digest what was going on.
And you've been doing this from inception, right? Because you started Street Capital in 2018, and the first report was 2018.
Yeah. There's no correlation between that. It looks good post facto, but
it's not a vision of VC plus content, plus media.
a lot of things just kind of come across because I just feel like it's a good idea, and no one's doing it, and so we should just try. Yeah, and then things
and
take
speaking
a
of somebody behind a desk typing, so this is a massive effort to this, just million slides and a lot of information in there. So how do you do it? Is that something you do a little bit every day, or at some point you just disappear for 3 months and do that 20 hours a day? How does that work?
Yeah, well, I guess the prior is I like producing kind of long form analytical content. I did undergrad, I did a thesis, I did a master's degree, I wrote a thesis, I did a PhD, I wrote a thesis, and I just been kind of trained to do my homework on time. I think if I had to cram this, it would be really painful. And so on a monthly basis, I'd already since 2015 started compiling papers, industry trends, companies that were getting started, and just kind of knocked together an analysis of why I thought they were interesting and what people should know about it. And so we've kind of labeled this Guide to AI, which we publish on a monthly basis. So at least that provides kind of a yardstick every month for what was interesting in that space of time. And then when it comes to doing the report, obviously we have kind of 10 months of history that then we can look back at this monthly yardstick and be the stuff that was included, actually it faded away or it changed or it's not cool anymore, or this thing's actually way bigger than what it was when we wrote about it.
From last year to this year, there's been a little bit of a vibes shift. Is that how you feel as well?
Yeah, I think it's accurate. I mean, there's been vibes in different kind of flavors. Like one is like, when you're trying a model, oftentimes builders will talk about the vibe, like what it feels like when you're talking to it. That's like one category of vibes. But then the other major one, which you highlight, particularly in the politics section, is just like the sort of pendulum switch from existential risk. If we get this wrong and if we scale it too fast, like we can potentially, generate the extinction of the human race, basically, to like switching to the complete other side of like, we need to scale these products. And like these models are very useful. We probably have like a technical overhang right now of just more products that we could build with the tech that we have. And there's a big race of trying to make money on this. And so what I found pretty surprising is just how powerful this vibe shift can occur, where you're like the same individuals who are, in front of like government leaders 12 months ago kind of warning about this are the same ones that are buying billboards in Paris or in New York saying like, please use my app. So yeah, it's tough to like, it's tough for me to understand like how that can occur and how that same individual can maintain these two modes at the same time. And maybe it's just smart people change their minds and that's how it goes. And I'm happy the shift has occurred that way, because I felt like the X risk kind of debate was kind of overblown.
In fairness, it's not necessarily just one company or the other. It feels like that doomerism kind of dialogue is just gone.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, right? I mean, could it be because people spend more time with models and trying the products and realize it's actually, those are hard to deploy and often wrong? Or what do you think?
I guess it could be a few things. I mean, there were statements like we should be bombing data centers. And this was like a major article in Time. Like these things are not a joke. It's wild. And there were individuals on CNN with like Cristiano Manpour, like telling millions of people that, AI systems are like living things, that we grow them, we don't code them. Like, this is scary, to like the normal person. And so like, what's happened since then? I think that, there's been enough research now that, like the general population doesn't really fall for deep fakes, like whether it's calls or like synthetic media, doesn't really change consumer opinion that much. People are not dumb. I think with models, people have gotten used to them quite fast. I think it's still probably hard to determine, hey, this text is written by ChatGPT or Claude unless it says certainly or
Yes.
Which I think
you were tweeting that, or like the difference between.
I just noticed it the other day. Actually, it was like somebody wrote this text and like edited by ChatGPT, and it said certainly. I'm like, this person definitely doesn't say that. And then Claude is like well known for So unless there are these artifacts, it's very hard to tell. And then I think the other part is like tech. I think like tech people in SF obviously live in a bubble, and it's quite techno-utopist. And I think they underestimate how much human inertia there is to the diffusion and adoption of technology in like the real world. Because in our job, like, a number of times where you meet a company that describes to you like this problem in an industry, and it's not like the product, it's not like that industry has the inability to source the technology to solve their problem. It's like people don't want to use it, or like there's like human inertia against adoption. So much stuff in like industry or manufacturing is like the equivalent of pen and paper. And like you could use a SaaS, but like it just doesn't happen. So I'm not necessarily sure that should AGI come, then from one moment to the next, like all these companies are screwed, and I don't know, the world sort of like tectonic plates shift that fast because human inertia is real.
And yes, for anybody listening to this, you have two VCs talking about vibes.
Yes.
This feels like a Twitter comedy, but no, this is a real serious podcast happening right now. Talking about foundation models, feels like it's continues to be in the heart of the action. From a state of AI 2024, what do you make of the current state of foundation models from a research perspective?
Yeah. So I mean, the major shift is like, first we started with single modality, just like language, input text tokens, output text tokens. Then we started to do like two modalities, maybe like text plus image, termed vision language models, and that's been really powerful for enabling this kind of renaissance of robotics and otherwise termed embodied AI. And then now we're maybe adding like a third dimension, which is audio, because oftentimes images and video come with joint audio, which probably kind of describes words, and so all these kind of modalities fit well together, and models trained with all these modalities can be more powerful. So yeah, one shift is this like growth to multimodality. Llama has it. So Meta's Llama has it. Anthropic has it. Not all the modalities. OpenAI as well. On that topic, I think what's been interesting is China was kind of not in this fight like 12 months ago, and now is very much in it. Like their models, like Alibaba's Qwen, and then the spin out from a quantitative hedge fund, DeepSeek, which publishes code models and others. And they've been actually a very lively contributor to open source. And on some of these vision language model benchmarks, they perform incredibly well. And that's interesting because like China hasn't been, or is certainly not portrayed in the West to be the most open ecosystem, number one. And number two, they've been victims of sanctions from the US government and other countries that are trying to rate limit access to either GPUs or like ELUV, these kind of lithography machines from Netherlands that are used to make these chips. So despite all this, they're still coming out with good stuff.
And it's interesting that they decided to be very strong open source contributors.
Yeah.
We had a Clem from Hugging Face on this podcast a few weeks ago. And we were talking about this, and is it sort of unclear why that happened? There must be some kind of very smart geopolitical reason.
If he doesn't know, I probably don't know. He's the king of open source, but it's interesting, and Western companies are using them. I think the data as of like a week or two ago from his platform Hugging Face is like there's probably over 500 million Llama derivative models that have been downloaded. I think Qwen is growing rapidly as well. So that's like one part of this debate. The other one is, of course, this like constant fight between OpenAI, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, GDM as being the main contenders. I think on the one side, you could say like the gaps seem to have narrowed in capabilities. Like when you're looking at these various benchmarks, and they sort of look increasingly esoteric to the non-expert perceiver, but the gaps seem to be pretty small. This is outside of like vibes and what they feel like, and I think there are consumer preferences for one or the other. But while the gaps have gotten small, and Meta has these like ginormous systems they're giving away for free, which are interesting in their own right. A sort of satirical take on all this is like you could have basically looked at the state of the landscape, like who's number one, who's number two, who's number three, 12 months ago, and then just deleted Twitter, like not read any like machine learning news for like 12 months, and then basically turned it on again and basically seen the exact same thing. In fact, today, I think there was some report from Ramp Data, which looks at credit card spend from their corporate customers and breaks down which model like their customers are using. And they made the claim, oh, look, there's a sort of fragmentation and just more models are being used. And so like, look, this like happy competition. But really like when you sum the makers of all these models that are getting used, it's still like 80% OpenAI. Like that hasn't changed. So it doesn't look like fragmentation to me. It looks like domination. So yeah, that's I think one of the main things, and that probably also goes to vibes. Like it's sort of like the Pepsi versus Coke. Like,
the theme of this.
I mean, it kind of tastes the same, but like it's very hard to convert a Coke drinker to a Pepsi drinker. It just like doesn't happen.
You were just talking about Llama. I think somewhere in the report you have this really funny sentence you call Zuckerberg the de facto messiah of open source. What do you see around Llama? What do you think? Why are they doing this? And what impact it's having?
Yeah, I mean it's probably one of the best like ROI trades of like a public company in like a long time. And basically like the chart shows that from the launch of Metaverse, like companies saying we're going to invest I don't know how many bajillion dollars in Metaverse, to basically we're going to stop doing Metaverse when the stock price was just bleeding, and I think various shareholders had written letters to tell them to stop, etc. That was like negative 600 billion or something like this in market cap for Meta. And then once they shifted from we're not going to do Metaverse anymore to we're going to do open source AI, and you go through like 1, 2, 3 Llama, that like trough to peak is like right now probably a plus 1.2 trillion. Sorry, so he turned a negative 600 billion to like a positive 1.3 trillion dollar market cap appreciation, which you could argue like who cares if anybody's using this stuff? Like that in itself is like amazing shareholder value creation.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of downloads. A lot of companies are using the Meta backbone, or at least the pre-trained model as a base for downstream tasks, and I think that's been very useful, and will probably continue to be useful. I think there's some like implementation details about whether it's dense or sparse or whatever. But I think the question I ask myself is, okay, if there are 500 million downloads on Hugging Face of this open source model, and they're pouring a bajillion resources into this, why is it that OpenAI and Anthropic's revenue keeps ripping? Right, why is it that it appears that developers and companies still vote for closed models that have more convenience or just reliable, fast, you don't have to worry about it? It'd probably be a bad analogy, but like, why is it that individuals who live in the West, who are sort of part of like a kind of middle class or up demographic, buy iPhones? I don't remember adding somebody's phone number recently that's not an iPhone.
Yep.
And so that just provides you with like a full stack, like nice experience. It just works. It always gets updated. And that seems to me very much like OpenAI. And then the Android is like, you can fork it if you want. You can do some funky stuff with it if you want. But like people don't really do it that much anymore. And then the challenge with open source too is like, who's going to run, how are you going to get big distribution? Who's going to run inference for this? Who's going to host it? And then when you look at Google has their own effort for their own models. We're probably going to prioritize that. Amazon also has Amazon AGI, like they pseudo-acqui-hired Adept for this and a few others. So I'm not sure if they're going to host it. And then they have the Anthropic relationship. And then Microsoft is like in this constant, frenemy situationship with OpenAI. So they're probably not going to host it. We're not going to invest very much in it. So who's left? Probably Databricks. And Databricks and Snowflake, probably more Databricks, will be like this this like enabler of open source. But yeah, it's tricky.
I guess Zuckerberg said a few months ago that he was not going to turn this into an enterprise business for Meta.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, they did at some point, right? They had a Slack competitor for a few
Workplace,
years.
I think, right?
Yeah, Workplace, yes. Yeah. So it would not be completely unheard of for Meta to run an enterprise business.
Yeah. It seems like that was... I don't know. It's hard to like give him strategy advice, but it seems like it's a shame they don't have a cloud business that they could at least serve this stuff to customers if they wanted to. But I do think ultimately that just comes back to what's Facebook Meta's core business, ads. And I think in his Meta Connect presentation not that long ago, he gave some stats around how consumers click through at a higher rate, and it was material. It was like something in the range of 7 to 10% click through improvement on generative ads, and that they've served like tens of billions of ads in the last month. So that's the ROI right there.
You were mentioning a second ago revenue at Foundation Model Labs ripping. That's also a big difference, or a significant difference from last year to this year. Right? It seems like foundation models, which a lot of people were thinking would never make much money, actually are making money.
Yep. That's a major one. I mean, I'm probably included. Like, I think anybody who tells you I'm going to launch a product and it's going to make billions of revenue in 1 year, I mean, it's like hard to believe, right? Because it never happens, but it did this time. So that's one, and then the second thing is that these models would be so expensive to run, like there's no margin in it. And that one seems to be changing a little bit, like whether it's just the sheer cost drop from the most expensive models like a year ago to now. I don't know, the most expensive one is maybe like $60 per million tokens. And now the cheapest one is probably like $0.06 per million tokens. Not the same level of intelligence, but not that far off. So I think most people I talk to who are close to the coalface working on inference improvement say that you will likely have similar quality of intelligence for much lower price and much smaller models as we kind of improve things like knowing what pre-training data to feed it, the sort of idea of curriculum learning, like very much the analogy to going to school. Like you don't get taught physics like PhD when you're like 10 years old. You get taught like the simpler stuff first. And then things like how to refine post-training, like what kind of example should you give it. And just given that I think we probably forget to include this, but just in general discourse. But until like ChatGPT and AI became super hypey, like there were not that many contributors who actually worked in this field. I think there was some data from various firms we included in prior reports, but it was like, I don't know, 100,000 like machine learners in the world, 1 million machine learners in the world, like really small numbers. And now I think you have everybody who spent, you know, years doing ad optimization, infrastructure optimization, like DevOps, like all this stuff of making software run really fast. We're now making AI run really fast. And these people are really smart, and like they will undoubtedly find issues that AI, like, you know, architecture people will have not been experts in. And so I think that's also what's driving some of the cost reduction, in addition to, of course, like good old-fashioned price wars.
You were quoting somewhere a chart that actually might be from Ramp as well, that shows some improved stickiness of AI applications in the enterprise.
Yeah. It was something like just directionally, it was like retention after 1 year in 2022 cohort was like 43%, I think. And then the cohort from 2023 after 12 months was like 65%. So that was pretty material. And then we also showed the billing, quarterly billing. So how much individual RAM customers were spending on AI products every quarter. And that's roughly doubled, or at least grown by 50%, which is like an argument against like, hey, this is all demoware. People are not really using it for real. And then in the next slide, or very close to it, we have data from Stripe, which I was looking for last year, like examples of this, and now I think it's like pretty clear so far. And it basically looks at the 100 most promising SaaS companies on Stripe and the 100 most promising AI companies on Stripe, founded before 2020 or after 2020. And then it charts how long those companies took from their first sale on Stripe to reach certain revenue targets. And it's something like, pre-Gen, I think 2020 is obviously not Gen AI, but like pre-2020, it took like 12 months or something like this. Maybe you have the data.
I wrote down that sentence because it was very striking. So the average AI company that has reached $30 million plus dollars in annualized revenue took 20 months to get there, compared to 65 months for equally promising SaaS companies. That's
crazy. It's like 1.5 years versus 5 years.
Yes.
I mean, this is insane. So you could argue, okay, whatever goes up that fast comes down that fast. But I mean, it's pretty amazing we got there in the first place. And I'm not sure we're going to come down that fast. So I think that is really striking. And they sell internationally way faster. That's the other part that we didn't include in there. I think like the interest was so big that I think expectations were like we would immediately see the result of this like everywhere. But the reality is like tech just takes time to diffuse. Like, patterns, like user behavior patterns take time to change. I think when you look at certain demographics, like age demographics, people adopt things quite differently. Like older generations, like when you show them like ChatGPT voice mode, like it's magical. Mm-hmm. And then like younger kids using voice notes and text to speech, like this is normal. So I think like for us in this sort of like we're still used to Google and we train our minds so much to Google, like it's a bit harder to move. But if you're in this like I need to learn things really fast on the fly, which is like what we do every day, like it's pretty hard to do that when you're in front of Google. But if you're in front of a generative search solution, it's way faster. And then I think we can get into like the avatar stuff, video, and voice.
So we've talked about the foundation models and I guess like adoption on all the things, but like in terms of apps and all the things. So that's one area you're excited about.
Yeah, I think a good litmus test is like if you have a meeting with somebody who's knowledgeable, smart, but they're not an AI, and they say like, "Hey Matt, like why should I be excited about this? Like what's cool? Like what is the demo you give them?"
Yep.
And for me, the demo I give them is like voice generation because I think it's basically solved, and it's like magical. And like this was not possible before. I mean, Deep Speech 2 was written like 10 years ago, which was like the paper at Baidu, which has all these authors on it that have now gone on to found, Anthropic, like Adept. They lead teams at NVIDIA, et cetera. And that was the first paper that really showed scaling laws for deep learning in speech, scaling like models to large high-performance computing clusters and showing like more data, bigger models, more parameters leads to lower loss. And so 10 years on, like now that you can clone your voice with, probably like a few minutes if you want it perfect, like 30 minutes or something, reading arbitrary stuff. And then you can just sit there in a meeting and say, what do you want me to say? You just type it and it's there. It's amazing. So that, and then like, doing your avatar and like that plus your voice, whether it's like video or through a call is, I don't know, it's just like magic. And I think this is the main thing for me. It's that classic, weight but wide chart, where, of like how people can perceive technology progress, where you're sort of on this like kind of, I don't know, 1 or 2% like compounded annual growth rate curve, and you're like, oh, it's kind of going. And then you have this like crazy wall in front of you, but you can't see it until you're like really there.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like here. Which is why like earlier in January, we did like a 5-year retrospective of the report, which is to say like, what is it that we have available today that basically we take for granted? And if you showed this to somebody back when I started investing or when you started investing, you would literally say it's magic. And I think that's hard to argue with. And so that kind of progress is like truly insane, which is like the thing that's nice to remind yourself when you get jaded with things.
Yes, exactly. Maybe thinking through applications with your investor hat on, what is it that you're looking for, excited about these days?
Yeah, I'd say I'm trying to find like the classic, like what is not consensus now, like what are people not believing, what has been tried and like they're like, no, it's not going to work anymore, but for some reason you think like it will in like 2-3 years, and obviously if you're wrong after 3-4 years, you're basically dead and wrong timing, etc. So taking that lens, like I was excited about like AI and biotech 5-6 years ago, made a few investments in there. Defense was interesting. In Europe, it played out a little bit more in the US a few years before, but pre-Ukraine, there was really not that much, and now there's like more and more.
So meaning that that thesis is not played out, but it's less contrarian.
Yeah, it's less contrarian. Like everybody's talking about it. We can debate whether investors are actually wiring money to companies, which I think is not really happening that much outside of the big kind of proto winners in the US. And then only 1 or 2 years ago, robotics was still like an iron touch in that in the market, and now with like these vision language systems and other things, it's now like a renaissance. So, and I'm trying to ask myself now, like, what is the next thing there? And I don't have a super good answer to it, but I do think that the surface of products that you could build in the prosumer space is vastly bigger than what you see in enterprise. In an enterprise, it's like search, retrieval, summarization, like some kind of reasoning agent for blah, blah, blah. I don't like the word agentic.
Why not?
Well, so I just think it's like too techy. And actually I had this conversation with somebody who was like a head of design for a consumer Gen AI product. And he was saying, a big task for me is like, if I can show it to a normal person and they look at the interface and they know what to do with it. And like you kids that are saying agentic, workflow, clone, like normal people think that's scary. Like that's not a product somebody wants to use. So like kind of get out of your bubble with like real people and try to understand like how to relate to them. So it's just too buzzword moniker for me.
But you were saying, so the consumer space seems to be wider.
Yeah, and now that like voice cloning is super easy, like what can you do with that? I think there's all sorts of like consumer, socially, like productivity. I don't know, just like little micro apps you could build now that you can code basically for free. Perhaps you could like expose some of that capability to an end user so that they're not stuck in this like I'm an average user, basically just stomaching the monthly release cycles from a big tech company. Like, why can't I customize my thing? Why is my camera so dumb? So I'm trying to like explore that and try not to be too opinionated on what the starting product is, but find people who are like opinionated, tasteful, like product engineers and product designers, more so than like super deep AI people. Because I think we have the primitives now that you can benefit from all the good stuff that SaaS people had for the last like 15 years, which is like, hey, I have a hypothesis. Cool. I can just spin up this, spin up that, spin up this, and have my service and test the idea without burning through my whole seed runway. I think back when like I started, and certainly probably when you started, it's like you'd probably burn your whole seed runway trying to figure out like that your thing even works to go test the hypothesis with somebody who may care about it. And then it's like game over if you lost.
Interesting. So to play that back, you think that AI is sort of out of the deep tech kind of phase, and now you actually don't need to be an AI engineer to build an AI company?
Pretty much, yeah. In the starting days, yeah. Like I think if I were doing something, I'd really look at what system can I use out of the box, use some sexy prompting, sticky tape, whatever, and then use that to really test the product hypothesis as much as you can. And then if you can like start scaling your product with some third-party system, like go for it. And then maybe when you get to the point where you need to assess unit economics, maybe you learn like enough about what the user is doing so that you can see, hey, look, like there's a distribution of tasks that my model has to answer and solve for my customers. And maybe only 10% of that distribution like needs this sexy, expensive model, and then the rest I could probably do with something else. Then for like until we get to the point where intelligence is too cheap to meter, et cetera, you might as well just like peel the onion and say like, hey, for this I'm going to use this model, this I'm going to use that model, and then just optimize it. And maybe at that point you need somebody who's a bit closer to the weeds and can optimize your stack for you and really juice out your unit economics and stuff. But I think until that happens, like eat the free lunch.
Yeah. Robotics, which you mentioned a minute ago as an area that at least you used to spend time in. What do you see there? That seems to be like for the last X many months, it seems to be the one thing when you ask VCs in particular, what they're excited about this. People seem to think that the big moment for robotics has arrived.
Yeah.
Like where do you stand on that?
Yeah. Well, I think the moniker would probably fall under like embodied AI, which is sort of first started hearing right through like Alex Kendall at Wave, who's been like professing this for like his whole journey at Wave, which is like 7 years or something. Mm-hmm. This idea of like fully end-to-end learned robotic systems that don't operate only in the digital world, but have sort of like some physical embodiment and can navigate this world. The most hypey like instantiation of that today is humanoids. I don't think it's like a mass VC product yet, but certainly everybody's talking about it. And then a derivative of that is like a robotic foundation model, like some general purpose system that can control different robotic hardware, whether it's like a 4-legged dog or a bipedal robot or a drone. There's some companies purely working on models there that have raised a ton of money at very high prices also. And then there's probably the more prosaic but useful application, which is warehouse robotics, where I think, we've had 10 to 15 years of companies try to train pick-and-place robots and generally meet a customer that didn't really want them or hadn't invested in the sort of infrastructure layer, which for them would be warehouse automation systems, which just like move parcels around. And those have become way more popular. And then post-COVID, like labor issues have really been a thing. And now you no longer need to train a single model for every customer where they, you say, hey, give me your data, I'm going to annotate like all these different products and train a system to work specifically in your environment. Now it actually looks increasingly the case that you can take one of these vision language systems and train a general purpose system that can work across all your customers. And that's like a pretty big unlock because the go live time and therefore ROI is like way faster. So I'm excited about that and to see where that goes.
Reading the report, you seem to be less of a fan of hardware meets AI, like the pins and the different products out there.
I think this is so hard to time. Even a couple of years ago, some people were thinking it would be great if AirPods had solutions for hearing impaired or could do noise canceling and stuff. And it's like now we have it.
So it's not a startup.
Yeah, so it's like hard to, it's like the AirPods are so great. And then, so to compete against that as a startup, you're going to have to basically build an AirPod plus like everything else and compete against $1 trillion company. And again, like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, this is hard to compete against. So I don't know. I think consumers are very fickle with hardware. In that sense, it's been pretty amazing to see like the positive reception from Meta's glasses and also from the recent Orion product. I mean, I can't remember a time where tech analysts and commentators were as positive on like a Meta product release. And if it's true that Apple's pulling back the Vision Pro, I mean, it's pretty astounding. And maybe that's like an interesting insight. There's like people like the glasses because the music is great. Like the AI sucks basically, as far as I can tell from people, but the music is great. So I think you sort of have to like crack an everyday behavior and get to the point where it's good enough to compete against Apple and other companies, and then maybe you have a shot at winning more of the like experience around the physical product. And yeah, like the pins, there were like solutions looking for a problem, I think.
We talked about China a bit. I'm continue to be fascinated by the geopolitics of AI and especially the intersection with regulation and all the things. So there were some stuff in the report. And then you also have a kind of like a voiceover video for the report that we'll put in the show notes. You were mentioning things I hadn't realized. Like in Europe, there are certain, because of the EU Act, there are actually certain products that are not available.
Yeah. Yeah, if you want to go back in time, take a flight. Yeah, I mean, I think until May, Claude was not available in Europe. Apparently, OpenAI doesn't have plans to release advanced voice mode. I remember requesting to not have my Facebook data be used in Gen AI products, which I had to do before the end of June as a European resident. And then XAI had a bunch of run-ins with, I think, the Irish administration too, around like using training data from citizens there in their Grok models, and so they just gave up, and so I'm not using it at all. So yeah, it's been tough. I think I even saw on Twitter trending like a picture of Apple Intelligence US, and it's like, oh, we do all this like sexy stuff, and then in Europe it's like, we'll tell you when you have a phone call or something like this. So yeah, it's pretty stark. And at the same time, it seems like there's some hints, at least from what we read online, of buyer's remorse among some individuals involved in the EU AI Act. They might have like overstretched, but and then the Draghi report around like, hey, we're basically back on economic progress because we have too much legislation and we didn't invest enough. You're sort of like, it's the classic like facepalm.
Do you see some movement around, hey, we may have overregulated, and is that powerful enough that things may evolve, or is just like the inertia is just way too big?
I think the inertia is too big. I mean, Macron's had this narrative for a while, and like France was one of the bigger kind of defenders of open source, et cetera, but I don't think it's going to change much. I think the UK had a cool opportunity because, I mean, I think Brexit was a terrible idea for the record, but the value of that at least is like they can define their own policies, which they did well during COVID with approving their vaccine really fast. It was not a great vaccine, but like the approval process was good. Mm-hmm. And so in theory, they could use that to be like competitive in AI. But again, I think the country has like all sorts of other problems that they're working through, which are probably like higher priority than like solving for AGI and things like this. And then other countries just seem like they're complete disarray and like have basically no growth. So it looks depressing to me, to be honest. And then it doesn't help that on like the Twitter feed, every other week or something, there's somebody that's like, I'm so happy to announce I'm leaving London for New York or SF or something. I don't see that many people going the other way.
It seems that the European AI scene is, given all the above, pretty vibrant.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, like I think there's fantastic contributors there. It's this classic narrative that hasn't really changed. It's like so many of the top contributors in AI are either European or spent most of their educational career in Europe, including Nobel laureates, right? Many amazing companies are based there and would open offices there because of that talent. I mean, Europe has produced like pretty impactful deep tech companies as well over the years, whether it's like ASML or like Novo Nordisk or, Spotify or like other things, right? DeepMind. So it's like we have the capability to do it, but it's become more difficult, I think, given like the federation of interests. It's not like a unified place, and there's something to say about like unified authority and like single country, single market, more risk-taking mentality and culture is very hard to change.
Yeah, and by the way, I don't know if we mentioned it up front, and people may not immediately infer that from your accent, but like you based in London.
Yeah,
Air Street is in London, and you've been there for a number of years now.
Yeah. I was born in Europe, so and educated there as well. I mean, other than U.S. undergrad, but I sort of see myself like floating between U.S. and Europe for work.
What you just described is from the heartfelt perspective of somebody
from first-party experience.
Who's in that.
And trying to do like whatever we can to change it, whether it's trying to get the UK government to push for better policies around forming companies out of university research. If we want to have sovereignty in like energy, AI, defense, et cetera, we need to create a positive engine for forming these companies, and like that's not really been the situation in UK and Europe for many years. Now our latest thing is like trying to push for better procurement in the Ministry of Defense and other defense organizations across Europe to try and get more startups and tech companies in there. We'll try and put pressure where we believe we have like insight and some valuable opinion to share and some context. And I'm not partisan. I'm not like I'm not nationalistic either. Like I'll go where the opportunity is. So I hope it always comes across as like this is just like a genuine opinion from somebody who's lived through the system and like wants to see it improve. And if it doesn't improve, then like it's just sad to see.
Feels like the US from time to time could somehow come up with a terrible regulation as well. It's not completely immune to regulatory.
Yeah, for sure. But I think there's a lot of like entrenched interests for like the financial services industry, for technology, for progress, for people like creating a better life. That's like the whole purpose of, I think, why people came here in the first place. And then the second thing is, I think, to me, it's like for so long as like good people still want to come here, no matter what policy like comes into play in this country, like that's pretty hard to fight. So that magnetism, I think, would still make me bullish about the US. If that starts to change and people are, I don't want to come here anymore, then I think you have a problem.
What have we not touched upon? Oh yeah, your predictions.
Predictions, yeah.
Yes.
So we do predictions mostly to like keep ourselves accountable, to sort of show that this is not like a marketing exercise. Like I'm not selling anything. It's really like our view on where things are going. So we make about a dozen predictions every year and we grade them. We try to be, impartial about it and provide evidence where we got it right or got it wrong. And on average, it seems like we get roughly 50-50. So there you go. One of the major predictions I think we got right like a few years ago was that when ARM and NVIDIA announced that they were going to merge, we're like, this is not going to happen for competition grounds. And that eventually like came true about a year or so later. We made like a similar prediction again last year, I believe, where we said that the CMA or the FTC or some other regulatory body would start investigating acquisitions and sort of like these massive pseudo majority investments between like Microsoft and OpenAI or Anthropic and Amazon. That seems to be happening also. We've been pretty bearish on like alternative chip companies for a long time, saying that there would either be like consolidation or failures or acquisitions of some form. That's sort of happened to some degree, but not to the extent that we thought. I thought it'd be much more of a bloodbath.
I guess as you outlined in the report, I guess Cerebras IPO is going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah. I mean, a sort of last minute slide I made just because it's been the best way of describing my feeling about alternative chip companies is say, okay, how many $1 billion has been invested in like I'm a competitor to NVIDIA over the last like few years, and call it there's like 7 companies, private companies, and it's been $6 billion invested in those businesses. And so we took the amount of money that was announced in that funding round at that time and then divided it by the NVIDIA share price on that day, calculated the number of shares, and then summed the number of shares that you would have alternatively bought in NVIDIA with that $6 billion over the last 6 years. What is that worth today versus like what is your investment in this basket of alternative like NVIDIA competitors? And it's basically like 6 billion turned into 30 billion roughly, of which half is Cambricon, which is a Chinese listed company. And then NVIDIA would be worth 120 billion. It's like 20x in a liquid market. So I don't really see how this is going anywhere. I think NVIDIA for sure is real, and we have some I think it's really interesting data about just how much longevity that company has in its products. So we chart the use of specific chipsets in published open source AI research every year. And so there's like, I don't know, tens of thousands of papers or something like this. And if you sum all the papers that use NVIDIA chips versus all the papers that use TPUs, FPGAs, ASICs, Apple, Huawei, the sum of all NVIDIA papers versus the sum of everybody else, the delta is like 11 times. Mm-hmm. So it was 19 times last year. So it's dropping a little bit, mostly driven by the growth of Google's TPU usage, which is up like 5x year on year. But the chasm is massive. And the other thing that's interesting is like the types of chips that researchers are using shows you just how long they are relevant. So for example, last year, the most popular chip was the V100, which was released almost like 6 or 7 years ago. So we can chart basically like the growth of papers with the V100 over time, peaks last year, and then if you sort of unscientifically complete the Gaussian, like that length of time is like 10 years. So this company is like shipping new products like twice a year on the chip side, not even including like the interconnects and then NVLink and other things. And each generation is like useful for 10 years. And how do you beat that? It's truly astounding.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought there would be a lot more carnage in the chip space than what we've seen. So sometimes we do repeat predictions just to enforce our conviction.
And that people should check that out. That's sort of slide 86 to 94, 95 in the report. Okay, so that's another prediction. What else?
Yeah. So this year we predicted that there would be some kind of like blockbuster app, like call it, I don't know, like Apple Store top 100 or top 50 that was like fully written in a generative fashion. So that like some guy or girl like who doesn't know how to code wrote this thing and it just went like viral. So sort of like Flappy Bird or something, but like generative.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And just given how much hype there is around, like, hey, I spent 15 minutes and I wrote this Mac app. And I have friends who do this. Like, it's pretty wild. It's like making me want to try things as well. And then like we also predicted like a year ago or so that you'd get like the first generative music track that hit like a Billboard, like a top Billboard chart. And I think that happened in Germany actually on Spotify. So it's just like some favorite snippets.
What else we have? Levels of investment in humanoids will trail off as companies struggle to achieve product market fit.
Yeah, the TLDR is I feel like it's going to be self-driving. Like the progress so far looks exciting. The demos look good, but we obviously don't see everything that's happening in the background. And I think it's going to be like a long slog.
And self-driving is an area that you covered quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, just like delay after delay and overpromise and overpromise.
But now it's real.
But now you fly to SF and Waymo's epic. Like I have friends who put their 3-year-old in there and, you know, that kid calls it a robocar and like it's excited to ride it in the weekend.
Yes. It's quite literally insane. I mean, maybe for people listening to this that like obviously live in San Francisco, but I go to San Francisco from time to time, maybe it's become just like a regular thing, but like it's truly an example of like the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It's sort of insane how incredible an experience that is.
Yeah.
And how both fascinating, but after a little while, normal it feels.
Yeah, it just gets boring. Yeah, and I just think about these kids that grow up in that era, and then when they become teenagers, like, why is somebody driving my car? Like, get out of my car.
That's it.
Just in the same way that, you know...
It's like, well, why did you have to take... What was it called? The driving test?
Yeah.
Like, you know.
I mean, like, exactly. Kids use Uber now, they don't drive. But next generation, like, I don't want somebody driving me at all.
Yeah.
This is my space.
Yes.
Also, I think it helps the cars are really plush. Yeah, exactly.
My apps, which become number one on the Apple App Store.
Yeah. So, that's been a real cool turnaround. I mean, perhaps like another contrast of where we were 2018 versus now is just the general capability of like visual common sense and like I show you a scene, what's happening in it. I mean, this basically is solved right now. Like, you know, machines can describe this in intricate detail and get the nuances pretty well. But like, it was not too long ago in 2008, like visual QA was really hard. Like you showed the computer system a picture of a baby holding like a toothbrush and it would said like, a young man holds a baseball bat or something. And like there were memes of this on Twitter and it was so easy to spoof and brittle as hell. And it was, I think with GPT-2 that, you know, OpenAI started showing that, hey, you could treat an image as a sequence of pixels. And so you can process pixel by pixel as like a sequence instead of like doing these image patches and a model could somehow learn to do completions that way. So I think I was like, when we put this in the report a few years ago, I think this was like the first sort of like sign that I think as Arjay Karpathy, who edited the report at that point, said like this is like a general purpose, you know, architecture that scales way better than convolution. So anything you can model as a sequence, turns out this thing can learn.
You know, obviously one of the amazing things about the State of AI report is that it's the ultimate signal to noise, you know, ratio kind of product where it's all substance and verified and vetted and all the things. So, which is, you know, one of the reasons why it's amazing. what in your process of like doing this, like I assume you're just like constantly reading, learning, listening to stuff. Like what are some, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 favorite sources of information that like people should check out, be aware of, where you get a lot of interesting stuff on a regular basis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to shamelessly say like Twitter or X. I think that's amazing. I mean, most of my Twitter feed is machine learners, so this stuff just pops up. But I think if you're interested in semiconductors, like Dylan Patel at Semi-Analysis does like a pretty epic job of diving into exactly what the hell is happening here and the kind of big industry dynamics. Those are like the 2 main ones that I really enjoy, and then occasionally some essays from like key people. Like I think the Dario essay recently was pretty like very thoughtful, well written, and I try to stay away from like the sort of like hypey stuff to like we're gonna die stuff. But otherwise, I think you gotta sort of like follow the researchers on Twitter. I think they have like good hot takes. Yeah, that's like the town hall for machine learning, basically.
Sort of amazing, right? Like how Twitter is like this dumpster fire on the one hand, and then the beating heart of AI, generative AI, where researchers sort of chat with one another live in front of everyone.
I think it'd be hard to do a job without it.
Yep. Amazing. All right. Well, it's been amazing. Congrats again on this massive release, which is just fantastic, and really appreciate everything you do for the industry. And look forward to seeing some Air Street investments based on all of this over the next year.
Thank you. Good to have you.
Hi, it's Matt Turck again. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mad Podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd be very grateful if you would consider subscribing if you haven't already, or leaving a positive review or comment on whichever platform you're watching this or listening to this episode from. This really helps us build the podcast and get great guests. Thanks, and see you at the next episode.